The fog danced over the waters of Hollow Oak Bridge, wrapping the century-old structure like a cloak of secrets. Jessica's footsteps echoed on the ancient wood as she guided her mother, Eleanor, along the familiar path. The air was heavy with an almost palpable tension, as if nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, dear?" asked Eleanor, her voice as soft as the rustling leaves in the nearby trees. "Reminds me of those picnics we used to have when you were little. You always insisted on bringing that red checkered blanket." Jessica forced a smile, her fingers tightly gripping the worn leather bag she carried. Inside were not just documents, but a choice, a decision, a new beginning. The weight of responsibility for her mother's care had become unbearable in recent months, consuming her days, nights, and dreams. Each missed opportunity at work, each declined invitation, each moment of her own life put on hold seemed to scream in her ear like a constant siren. "You've always loved this place, haven't you?" continued Eleanor, her eyes sparkling with memories that seemed sharper than the present. "Your father brought me here on our first date. He was so nervous he almost fell into the water." She laughed, a crystalline sound that echoed through the fog. Jessica observed her mother as they walked. Eleanor, at 72, still maintained that natural elegance everyone admired. Even with her memory starting to fail, with slower steps and slightly trembling hands, she remained the respected matriarch of the community. The woman who never refused help to those in need, who knew everyone by name, who remembered birthdays and stories of every family in Serene Valley. "Everyone loves Eleanor Parker," thought Jessica, resentment growing like a wave inside her chest. Everyone except her own daughter. Eleanor stopped in the middle of the bridge, her breathing slightly labored from the effort. From her pocket, she pulled out a hand-embroidered handkerchief, the initials JP delicately stitched in one corner. "Jessica Parker," she said, extending the handkerchief to her daughter. "I embroidered this when you were still in school. Remember? You had just won that poetry contest." Her eyes, though clouded by age, overflowed with pride. "I always knew you would do extraordinary things." Something inside Jessica faltered. For a brief moment, she felt the impulse to hug her mother, to say all the words that had been stuck in her throat for years. But then, the weight of resentment returned. Career opportunities declined to care for Eleanor. The postponed marriage, the delayed dreams, the wounded pride each time someone said, "You're so different from your mother." A distant neigh cut through the silence. On the bank of the creek, partially hidden by the tree line, stood Thunderbolt, Eleanor's longtime companion horse. The golden animal watched, motionless, his attentive eyes focused on the bridge. "Look, Thunderbolt followed us," commented Eleanor with a smile. "He's always been so protective." Jessica looked at the horse, then at her mother, and finally at the bag she carried. Inside was the contract to sell the family farm, to transfer Eleanor to a distant nursing home, to finally get her life back. That's what she wanted, wasn't it? The fog thickened around them, as if the entire world wanted to hide what was about to happen. The riverside farmhouse seemed to whisper with stories when Jessica opened the front door that evening. The smell of lavender and cinnamon, always present for as long as she could remember, invaded her senses. Eleanor had prepared dinner before their walk, as she always did, Sunday roast even though it was Tuesday. Jessica placed her bag on the kitchen table, her thoughts still on the bridge. Nothing dramatic had happened after all, just a postponed decision, a moment of weakness, or was it strength, that prevented her from giving Eleanor the papers to sign, from announcing that the farm would be sold, that a new home awaited her mother hundreds of miles away, that Jessica could finally accept that long-dreamed promotion in Chicago. "You're very quiet," observed Eleanor, as she served 2 plates with the still hot roast. "Did something happen at work?" Jessica shook her head, sitting at the familiar table marked by decades of shared meals, laughter, arguments, and silences. That table that witnessed her childhood, her rebellious adolescence, her college years, and now her 35 years still living under the same roof as her mother. By choice, she told herself. By obligation, her heart whispered. "I'm just tired," she finally replied. "The project is demanding a lot." Eleanor nodded, but her eyes said she knew there was more. There was always more. The tension between them had existed for so many years that it had almost become a third family member, sitting at the table, occupying space between rare hugs, filtering words in everyday conversations. "I received a call from Martha today," said Eleanor, referring to the neighbor who lived 2 miles away. "Her son is coming back from the city, Seems he got a job at the regional hospital. Jessica just nodded, uninterested. Another prodigal son returning to the comfort of Serene Valley, while she remained trapped like a sentinel. The guardian of the legacy, the caretaker of the matriarch loved by all. Remember him? Michael. You studied together for a while, continued Eleanor, her fork moving in circles in the air as she spoke. He asked about you. Mom, please, sighed Jessica. Don't start with that again. I don't need you trying to arrange suitors for me. I have a career. I have plans. Eleanor's eyes softened, a mixture of concern and understanding illuminating her time-marked face. I know, dear. I just thought, you seem so lonely sometimes. Jessica felt the anger grow, that old acquaintance that regularly visited her heart. Lonely. How could she be lonely when she never had a moment truly her own? When every decision needed to consider, and what about Mom? Who will take care of her? I'm fine, she replied dryly, pushing the plate away. Actually, I have some news. Her hand rested on the bag, feeling the outline of the papers inside. It was time to tell the truth, to put her needs first for once. A sound from outside interrupted the moment. Thunderbolt's familiar neigh, followed by insistent thuds on the porch steps. What is he doing? Asked Jessica, getting up to look out the window. Thunderbolt was in the yard, his eyes fixed on the house, specifically on her. He didn't move, didn't graze, just watched, like on the bridge, as if he knew something no one else knew. He must be hungry, commented Eleanor, already getting up to fetch some apples from the basket in the kitchen. He's always been a bit dramatic when he wants attention. Jessica watched her mother walk slowly to the door, talking to the horse as if he were a person. I'm coming, big guy. Don't be impatient. That was Eleanor, the woman who talked to horses and trees, who knew the name of every visible star in the night sky, who kept in memory the recipes of 4 generations of women in the family, the woman everyone admired, who everyone wanted as a friend, counselor, almost a mystical figure of the valley. And the worst part, the woman who never really saw who Jessica was, who never understood that her daughter needed more than a farm and traditions, who never realized how her expectations weighed like chains. I'm going to my room, announced Jessica when Eleanor returned. I have work to finish. But you barely touched your food, protested her mother. I'm not hungry. Climbing the stairs to her room, the same one where she grew up with the same light blue walls, the same patchwork quilt on the bed, Jessica felt the weight of the day double her shoulders. At the desk, she opened her laptop and stared at the screen for long minutes. An unread email flashed in the inbox. Her boss. We need your answer by Friday. The position in Chicago can't wait any longer. Jessica looked out the window. In the yard, partially illuminated by the kitchen light, Thunderbolt was still there, motionless, watching. His eyes, even at a distance, seemed to contain an ancient and disturbing wisdom. Here's just a horse, she muttered to herself, closing the curtain forcefully. But that night in her dreams, Jessica saw those eyes again, vigilant, knowing, witnesses to something she herself couldn't name. Morning arrived with birdsong and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Jessica descended the stairs, still sleepy, finding Eleanor on the porch, a steaming cup in her hands and a serene smile on her lips. Good morning, sleepyhead, greeted her mother, tapping lightly on the empty space of the bench beside her. Come, the morning air is wonderful today. Jessica obeyed without protest, something unusual in her routine of silent resistance. The poorly slept night had left her defenses down, and for a moment she allowed herself to simply exist beside her mother, like in childhood times, when the world seemed simpler. I had a strange dream last night, commented Eleanor, her eyes fixed on the distant hills where the sun began to spread its golden rays. I dreamed of your father. He was here, sitting with us, though he didn't say anything, just smiled, as if he knew something we're about to discover. Jessica felt a tightness in her chest. Her father had passed away 10 years ago, leaving a void that was never completely filled. Robert Parker was the balance between mother and daughter, the mediator, the translator of unspoken emotions, the safe harbor for both. You still miss him a lot, don't you? Asked Jessica, her voice softer than intended. Every day, replied Eleanor without hesitation, but not in the sad way you imagine. I miss him like you miss a favorite season, with the certainty that it will return somehow, at some point. She took a sip of coffee before continuing. You know what I miss most? How he could make you laugh. Even when you had that closed face of a rebellious teenager, he would say something silly and there it was. That smile of yours that would light up the whole room." Jessica didn't answer, but felt something inside her shifting, like ice beginning to melt after a long winter. They rarely talked about her father. It was a tacit agreement, as if mentioning Robert could bring up more pain than they could bear. But this morning, sitting on the porch of the house he built with his own hands, it seemed right. It seemed necessary. "Dad understood me in a way no one else did," she finally said, the words coming out before she could contain them. "He knew I needed more than this farm, that I dreamed of cities, of glass offices, of a job that would change something in the world." Eleanor was silent for a few moments, as if processing each word. "Robert always knew how to read people. It was a gift. But you're wrong about one thing, dear." She turned to face her daughter directly. "I always knew that too. I always knew you had wings to fly beyond these hills." The confession caught Jessica by surprise. "Then why did you always make me feel like I had to choose? Like staying here was an obligation?" Eleanor sighed, placing her cup on the small wooden table. "It was never my intention to make you feel trapped, Jessica. Maybe I did things wrong. When your father left us, I was so worried about keeping our family together, our home standing, that I didn't realize I was suffocating you in the process." A movement in the field caught both their attention. Thunderbolt was trotting toward the house, his majestic figure silhouetted against the sunny horizon. But he wasn't alone. At his side, another horse, smaller, younger, with white spots on its brown coat, accompanied his pace. "Willow," murmured Eleanor, a smile lighting up her face. "She's back." Jessica frowned. "Michael's mare. I thought he took her when he moved. He left her with his mother, but she ran away a few days later." Martha was devastated, thinking Willow had gotten lost or worse, explained Eleanor, already getting up to approach the animals. "But look, Thunderbolt found her." The great golden horse led the smaller mare to the stable, as if he had planned the entire operation. He stopped in front of Eleanor, softly whinnied, and then, to Jessica's surprise, walked directly toward her. His large brown eyes fixed on hers, communicating something that transcended words. "He wants you to follow him," said Eleanor, observing the interaction with curiosity. "It's just a horse, Mom," replied Jessica, though without much conviction. "Thunderbolt has never been just a horse, my daughter. You should know that better than anyone." And Jessica did know. She had grown up seeing the special bond between her mother and the majestic animal. How Eleanor whispered in his ear during storms, how he followed her around the property without needing reins or commands, how he seemed to understand every word said to him. With a sigh, Jessica decided to follow Thunderbolt, who was already walking toward the stable. Inside the old wooden structure, the animal stopped in front of an old chest covered by a canvas. With a head movement, he indicated the object. "What do you want to show me?" asked Jessica, feeling slightly foolish for talking to a horse as if he could answer. To her surprise, Thunderbolt pushed the canvas with his muzzle, revealing the chest that Jessica immediately recognized. It was her father's memory trunk, where he kept photographs, letters, small treasures of a well-lived life. Eleanor appeared at the entrance of the stable, observing the scene with a mixture of surprise and understanding. "He's never done that before," she commented, approaching slowly. "Robert was the only one who opened this trunk. After he left us, not even I had the courage to look at what was inside." Jessica knelt before the chest, feeling the weight of family history under her fingers. Carefully, she opened the lid, revealing the content preserved by a decade of silence. At the top of the pile of memories, a yellowed envelope with her name written in her father's unmistakable handwriting. "For Jessica, when you need to find your way." Hands trembling slightly, she opened the envelope, removing 2 sheets of paper. The first, a letter. The second, a deed. As she read her father's words, written years before, but as present as if he had just pronounced them, tears began to run down Jessica's face. Robert spoke of dreams. His, Eleanor's, Jessica's. He spoke of understanding, of freedom, of choices, and then he explained the deed. A small apartment in Chicago, bought with the savings of a lifetime, placed in Jessica's name for when she was ready to take flight. "He knew," she whispered, unable to contain the emotion. "He always knew." Eleanor, reading over her daughter's shoulder, also cried silently. "Robert was always a few steps ahead of all of us," she said with a choked voice. "He always noticed what we needed before we even knew." Thunderbolt watched the scene with that same mysterious intensity, as if his mission had been accomplished. Willow, the young mare, approached timidly, touching her muzzle to Jessica's shoulder in a surprisingly human gesture of comfort. In that moment, something began to change in Jessica's heart. Something that had been frozen by years of resentment and unmet expectations began to melt under the heat of a long-kept truth. She never had to choose between her family and her dreams. Her father had ensured that, and her mother, despite all communication failures, never wanted to trap her. The family's silent guardian, Thunderbolt, had been the catalyst for a revelation that was just waiting for the right moment to be discovered. The days that followed were strange for Jessica. The discovery of her father's letter and the apartment in Chicago should have simplified everything. Now she had the path open to accept the promotion, move, start the life she had always dreamed of. But instead of clarity, she felt immersed in a fog of contradictory emotions. The leather bag with the documents to sell the farm remained untouched on her desk, a constant reminder of the decision that no longer seemed so simple or correct. "You're very thoughtful today," observed Eleanor during lunch, as Jessica played with her food without really eating. "Is it about Robert's letter?" Jessica nodded vaguely, unable to express the turmoil in her mind. "I'm confused," she finally admitted. "For years I convinced myself that I needed to choose between taking care of you and pursuing my career. I built an entire wall of resentment based on that belief. And now," she gestured as if the appropriate words were floating in the air out of her reach, "and now you've discovered that you had options all along," Eleanor softly completed. "That your father, in his silent wisdom, had already prepared a path." "Exactly. But that makes everything even more confusing. If I always had this possibility, why did I never use it? Why did I spend years feeling trapped?" Jessica pushed her plate away, frustrated not with her mother but with herself. Maybe I needed something to blame for my own indecision." Eleanor remained silent for a few moments, her eyes reflecting decades of experiences and understanding. "Sometimes, Jessica, we build our own cages, not because we really want to be trapped, but because confinement is familiar, it's predictable, it's safe." The words hit Jessica like a ray of clarity amid the confusion. It was true. There was a peculiar safety in remaining on the farm, in maintaining the status quo. Change, even desired, brought with it uncertainties and fears that she had skillfully avoided confronting. A familiar neigh interrupted her thoughts. Through the kitchen window, she saw Thunderbolt in the yard, accompanied not just by Willow, but by 3 other horses that she recognized as belonging to neighboring farms. The animal's strange behavior continued, as if he were gathering a silent council of observers. "They're becoming more frequent," she commented, pointing to the animals. "Mom, don't you find this strange?" Eleanor observed the scene with a slight smile. "Thunderbolt has always had a way with other animals. Your father used to say he was more diplomat than horse." She paused, contemplative. "But yes, something different is happening, as if he were trying to tell us something." Jessica sighed, running her hand through her hair in a gesture of exasperation. "Don't start with this story that horses can communicate with us or understand complex human situations, please." "And why not?" questioned Eleanor, a gleam of challenge in her eyes. "You've spent so much time resisting everything you consider superstitious or irrational that perhaps you're missing important messages around you. Messages from a horse. Seriously, Mom. Messages from life, Jessica. From nature. From your own heart." Eleanor stood up, her movements slow but precise as she carried the plates to the sink. "When you were little, you were so intuitive. You could feel when it was going to rain hours before the clouds appeared. You knew when someone was sad, even if they were smiling. What happened to that girl who trusted her instincts?" The question hung in the air without an immediate answer. Jessica knew exactly what had happened. Years of formal education, of rationalization, of building a shield against disappointments. The intuitive girl gave way to the pragmatic woman who measured each decision by the ruler of logic and practicality. That afternoon, Jessica locked herself in her improvised office, determined to respond to her boss's email about the promotion. It was time to make a definitive decision, to put an end to this story of indecision. But the words wouldn't come. Each phrase she tried to formulate seemed incomplete, inadequate. After an hour of frustrated attempts, she decided to take a walk to clear her mind. Leaving the house, she found Thunderbolt waiting, as if he knew exactly when she would appear. The other horses had gone, but Willow remained, peacefully grazing a few meters ahead. "What do you want from me?" asked Jessica, approaching the majestic animal. To her surprise, Thunderbolt began to walk slowly toward the creek, occasionally stopping to check if she was following. Intrigued, and with nothing better to do, Jessica decided to accompany him. The path took them to Hollow Oak Bridge, the same place where, days before, Jessica had considered announcing to her mother her plans to sell the farm. Now, under the light of dusk, the bridge seemed different, less threatening, more contemplative. Thunderbolt stopped at the beginning of the bridge, softly whinnied, and then did something extraordinary. He knelt, as if inviting Jessica to mount. She hesitated. She hadn't ridden a horse since adolescence, and had never ridden Thunderbolt, her mother's exclusive companion. "Are you sure?" she asked, again feeling foolish for expecting an answer from an animal. But there was something in Thunderbolt's eyes that conveyed absolute certainty. Carefully, Jessica climbed onto his back, holding onto his golden mane. As soon as she adjusted, the horse rose gracefully and began to cross the bridge in measured steps. In the middle of the structure, Thunderbolt stopped. Below, the creek ran serenely, reflecting the orange sky of dusk. Jessica felt a strange sensation of déjà vu, as if she had already lived this moment in some forgotten dream. And then, a memory emerged, clear, vivid, as if it had happened yesterday. Her father, sitting exactly at this point on the bridge with 5-year-old Jessica in his lap, pointing to the waters below. "See how the creek never stops, little Jessica. That's how life should be, in constant movement, always moving forward, finding new paths when obstacles arise. Never stagnant, never trapped." The memory brought tears to her eyes. How could she have forgotten this moment? How could she have ignored the wisdom that her father had tried to transmit since her childhood? Thunderbolt remained motionless, as if understanding the importance of the moment of epiphany. Jessica leaned forward, hugging the animal's neck in a gesture of silent gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured against his soft mane. "I think I understand now." Upon returning home, Jessica found Eleanor on the porch, animatedly conversing with a man she recognized after a few seconds of observation. Michael, Martha's son, recently returned from the city. "Jessica!" exclaimed Eleanor upon seeing her approaching on Thunderbolt. An unprecedented sight. "Look who came to visit us. You remember Michael, don't you?" The man turned, and Jessica was greeted by a familiar smile from her childhood, now framed by a well-trimmed beard and expression lines that spoke of experiences and growth. "Of course," she replied, dismounting with Michael's help. "The boy who cried when I lost his pet frogs in the lake." Michael laughed, a sincere and relaxed sound. "And the girl who afterward dived into that same lake to rescue them, even though she was afraid of water." The unexpected encounter brought new energy to the evening. During the improvised dinner, Jessica discovered that Michael wasn't just visiting. He had accepted the position of medical director at the regional hospital, determined to improve healthcare in the rural community that saw him grow. "I spent years in the city, building a career, accumulating experience," he explained, his eyes reflecting the same passion that Jessica recognized in herself when talking about her professional projects. "But I always knew I would return. This place, these people, they're in my DNA." The words resonated with Jessica in an unexpected way. Was it possible, then, to reconcile professional ambition and connection with her roots? Was it possible to build a meaningful career without completely abandoning the place and people that formed who she was? Later, after Michael said goodbye with the promise to return on the weekend to help with some roof repairs, Jessica found herself again contemplating the unanswered email on her laptop. But now something had changed. The clarity she sought began to form, not from cold logic, but from a deeper and more intuitive understanding of what she really wanted. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her boss, probably tired of waiting for her answer about the promotion. "Jessica," he said without preamble, "I need your decision. The position in Chicago can't wait any longer." Taking a deep breath, Jessica finally answered, not with the response she had rehearsed for years, but with the truth she had just discovered in her heart. The next morning brought a sky of impossible blue and a lightness Jessica hadn't felt in years. The conversation with her boss the night before had been surprisingly liberating, not because she had made the right decision, but because she had finally made a decision that was truly hers. "You turned down the promotion?" asked Eleanor, eyes wide with surprise when Jessica shared the news over breakfast. She had expected shock, perhaps disappointment, but not the gentle understanding that now softened her mother's features. "Not exactly," Jessica explained, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. "I proposed something different, a remote position with occasional travel to Chicago for important meetings, running the Midwest regional projects from here in Serene Valley. And they agreed to that. A smile spread across Jessica's face, the kind of smile that had been rare in recent years, genuine and unburdened. Not immediately, but when I explained my vision for expanding into rural markets, for understanding communities like ours from within, instead of imposing city solutions, well, they listened. Eleanor reached across the table, covering her daughter's hand with her own. The wrinkled skin against Jessica's smoother one, a bridge between generations, between different wisdoms. I'm proud of you, not for staying or going, but for finding your own path. Those simple words, I'm proud of you, landed differently this time. For years, Jessica had assumed that her mother's pride was conditional, dependent on her following a specific script. Now she understood that Eleanor's pride went deeper, was rooted in seeing her daughter claim her own authentic voice. Over the next few days, subtle changes began to transform the Riverside farm. Jessica cleared out the old storage room, converting it into a proper home office with modern technology that connected her to colleagues in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. Eleanor, seemingly energized by the new developments, began expanding her vegetable garden, talking about possibly supplying the local farmers market again, as she had done when Robert was alive. Thunderbolt's behavior changed too. The constant watchful presence softened into something more companionable. He still appeared at unexpected moments, but now it felt less like surveillance and more like friendly company. One afternoon, as Jessica worked remotely on a presentation, she looked up to find the golden horse standing by her office window, Willow alongside him. "I guess you approve of my decision," she said through the open window, feeling only a little foolish for carrying on conversations with a horse. Thunderbolt whinnied softly, nodding his head in a gesture that seemed almost human in its understanding. That weekend, as promised, Michael returned to help with the roof repairs. Jessica found herself climbing ladders, passing tools, and learning about roof shingles from a man who seemed as comfortable discussing emergency medicine as he was handling a hammer. "You know," he said during a water break, both of them seated on the edge of the porch, sweat glistening on their foreheads, "when I was in Chicago, I used to dream about this place. The open skies, the community where everyone knows your name, the pace of life that allows you to actually notice when seasons change." Jessica nodded, understanding perfectly. "I always thought I had to escape to find myself. That success meant tall buildings and power suits and conference rooms overlooking city skylines. And now? Now I'm wondering if success might look different for different people. If maybe it's about alignment, finding the life that doesn't require you to constantly fight against your own nature." Michael smiled, passing her a freshly sliced apple from Eleanor's kitchen. "Sounds like someone's been having some important conversations with herself." Later that evening, after Michael had gone home with promises to return for Sunday dinner, Jessica found herself drawn to her father's memory trunk again. This time she dug deeper, beyond the letter and the deed, discovering photographs, journals, and small treasures that told the story of Robert Parker's life. Among the items was a small wooden horse, exquisitely carved with a note attached. "For Jessica, may you always find your way home, no matter how far you roam." The craftsmanship was unmistakably her father's. He had been skilled with woodworking tools, creating pieces that blended function and art. Holding the carving, Jessica felt an overwhelming sense of connection to her father, to this land, to the life force that flowed through the creek and rose from the fertile soil of the valley. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry without restraint, not tears of frustration or resentment, but of release and recognition. When Eleanor found her daughter sitting on the stable floor, surrounded by Robert's memories, she didn't ask questions. She simply sat beside her, their shoulders touching, creating a bridge of understanding that required no words. "He made this for me," Jessica finally said, holding up the wooden horse. "I don't remember him giving it to me." "He never did," Eleanor replied softly. "He finished it just before he left us. Said it wasn't the right time yet, that you would need it someday, when you were ready to see with new eyes." Jessica studied the carving more closely. The horse bore a striking resemblance to Thunderbolt, though her father had carved it years before the actual horse came into their lives. "How did he know?" she whispered. Eleanor smiled, the kind of smile that held mysteries and acceptance in equal measure. "Your father always said that some truths arrive before we're ready to recognize them. That wisdom sometimes comes to us disguised as coincidence or dream, or even as a stubborn horse who won't stop watching us until we see what's right in front of our eyes. The next morning, Jessica woke before dawn, driven by an impulse she couldn't name. Wrapping herself in a warm blanket, she made her way to the hilltop behind the farm, a spot her father had called the thinking place, and watched as the first rays of sun painted the valley in hues of gold and pink. As if summoned by her thoughts, Thunderbolt appeared beside her, his warm presence a comfort against the morning chill. Without hesitation, Jessica mounted the horse bareback, allowing him to choose their path. He carried her to places she had forgotten, the old apple orchard where her father had built her a swing, the small pond where she'd learned to swim, the rocky outcrop that offered views all the way to the neighboring town. With each place, memories resurfaced, not just of childhood joys, but of connections, of belonging, of a sense of identity that had been buried beneath layers of ambition and perceived obligations. When Jessica finally returned to the farmhouse, Eleanor was waiting with fresh coffee and knowing eyes. "Good ride?" she asked simply. "I remember now," Jessica replied, her voice steady with newfound clarity. "I remember who I am." And in that moment, something fundamental shifted, not just in Jessica's perspective, but in the very fabric of the relationship between mother and daughter. The transformation that had begun as a small crack in a wall of resentment was now becoming a real and tangible change, flowing between them like the creek that never stopped moving. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to Jessica's life that she hadn't experienced before. Neither the frantic pace of her career-focused existence nor the stagnant waiting that had characterized her years of indecision. Instead, she found herself in a flow that somehow incorporated both movement and rootedness, ambition and connection. Her remote work arrangement had proven more successful than even she had anticipated. Her understanding of rural communities gave her insights that her urban colleagues lacked, and her proposals for expanding services to areas like Serene Valley were gaining traction with the company leadership. "It's like you're speaking a different language now," her boss commented during a video conference. "There's an authenticity to your presentations that wasn't there before." Jessica knew what had changed. She was no longer trying to be someone else, to fit a mold she thought represented success. Instead, she was bringing her whole self to her work, her rural upbringing, her understanding of community needs, her appreciation for both tradition and innovation. At home, the relationship with Eleanor continued to evolve. One evening, as they worked side by side in the garden, Jessica learning the names and needs of plants her mother had tended for decades, Eleanor broached a subject that had long been avoided. "I was afraid, you know," she said quietly, her hands still working methodically in the soil. "After your father died, not just of being alone, but of losing you too." Jessica paused, looking up at her mother's profile against the setting sun. "Losing me? I never went anywhere. Not physically, no, but I could feel you pulling away in other ways, building walls. I didn't know how to reach you, and I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, you'd leave completely." Eleanor's voice trembled slightly. "So I held on too tight. Tried to keep everything the same, thinking that would keep you here. I didn't realize I was just pushing you further away." The confession hung in the air between them, both painful and healing. Jessica moved closer, taking her mother's soil-covered hands in her own. "I was afraid too," she admitted, "afraid that if I fully embraced the life I thought I wanted, I'd be betraying Dad's memory, betraying you, betraying this place that made me who I am. So I stayed, but I resented it. Blamed you for choices that were really my own." Tears glistened in Eleanor's eyes, catching the golden light of sunset. "We've wasted so much time, haven't we? Standing on opposite sides of a river when we could have been building a bridge." "Maybe," Jessica replied softly, "or maybe we needed this time to grow separately before we could truly understand each other." That night, Jessica dreamed of rivers, of currents meeting, separating and rejoining in complex patterns that somehow formed a coherent whole. She woke with a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since childhood. As summer deepened, bringing long golden evenings and star-filled nights, Serene Valley embraced its annual traditions. The Midsummer Festival approached, a weekend of community celebration that Jessica had often avoided in recent years, making excuses about work deadlines or fatigue. "Will you help with the festival committee this year?" Eleanor asked cautiously one morning, clearly expecting a polite refusal. To her surprise, Jessica nodded. "I'd like that. Actually, I've been thinking, what if we offered the farm as one of the locations? The old barn would be perfect for the craft market, and the meadow could host the evening concerts. Eleanor's face lit up with a mixture of shock and delight. "You want to host part of the festival here? After all these years of saying the farm was too much work already?" Jessica smiled, surprising herself with how natural it felt. "I think it's time to open the gates a little wider. This place has been a sanctuary for us, but maybe it can be more. A gathering place like it was when Dad was alive." The mention of Robert no longer brought that sharp pain, that sense of loss that had to be immediately covered over. Instead, it felt like inviting his memory to be present, to be celebrated rather than mourned. Preparations for the festival brought a steady stream of visitors to the farm, committee members discussing logistics, volunteers helping clean the barn, neighbors offering additional tables and chairs. Jessica found herself enjoying the activity, the sense of purpose that came from working alongside others toward a shared goal. Michael became a regular presence, stopping by most evenings after his hospital shift. His practical skills complemented Jessica's organizational abilities, and together, they transformed the old barn into a welcoming space, stringing fairy lights from the rafters and arranging display areas for local artisans. "You're different," he observed one evening as they sat on the porch steps, taking a break from their labors. "From what I remembered, and even from when I first came back a few weeks ago." "Different how?" Jessica asked, genuinely curious about how her transformation looked from the outside. Michael considered for a moment. "More present, like you're actually here, not just physically but mentally and emotionally too. Before, it always felt like part of you was somewhere else, waiting for real life to begin." His observation was startlingly accurate. For years, Jessica had lived in a state of suspended animation, treating her life at the farm as temporary, transitional, not quite real. Now she was allowing herself to be fully where she was, to invest not just her time, but her heart in the present moment. The night before the festival, Thunderbolt appeared at Jessica's window, his familiar presence now a welcome sight rather than an unsettling one. She went outside, stroking his golden neck in the moonlight. "Tomorrow's the big day," she told him softly. "Are you ready to meet half the county?" The horse nudged her gently, then turned his head toward the direction of Hollow Oak Bridge. His meaning was clear, even to Jessica, who had once scoffed at the idea of horses communicating with humans. "Now it's almost midnight." Thunderbolt remained steadfast, his intention unmistakable. With a small laugh of surrender, Jessica went inside to grab a light jacket, leaving a note for Eleanor in case she woke to find her daughter gone. Then she mounted Thunderbolt, now comfortable on his bare back, and allowed him to carry her through the moonlit landscape. The bridge looked magical in the silvery light, the creek below reflecting stars like scattered diamonds. Thunderbolt stopped in the middle, exactly where Jessica had stood with Eleanor weeks ago, contemplating a decision that now seemed from another lifetime. From his position on the bridge, Thunderbolt whinnied loudly, once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed across the valley, hanging in the still night air. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, Jessica heard it, answering whinnies from multiple directions, and suddenly, they were not alone. Horses appeared from the darkness, first 1, then 3, then a dozen or more. Some Jessica recognized from neighboring farms, others were unfamiliar. They gathered on and around the bridge in a scene so extraordinary that Jessica wondered if she had fallen asleep and was dreaming. Among them was Willow, Michael's mare, who approached to stand at Thunderbolt's side. The 2 horses exchanged what could only be described as knowing looks. "What is this?" Jessica whispered, afraid to break the spell of the moment. As if in answer, Thunderbolt began to move, the other horses parting to create a path. He carried Jessica to the far side of the bridge, then up a small hill she had rarely visited. At the top stood an ancient oak tree, its massive branches spreading like protective arms. Nestled in the roots of the tree was a small stone marker, weathered by years of sun and rain. Jessica dismounted, kneeling to examine it. The inscription was faded but still legible. "Robert Parker loved this land and all who dwelled upon it." Jessica's breath caught. "Dad's memorial stone," she murmured. Eleanor had mentioned placing something at his favorite spot, but Jessica had never asked where, had actively avoided any location that might intensify her grief. Around her, the horses formed a circle, silent witnesses to this moment of discovery. In their presence, Jessica felt a profound sense of continuity, of life flowing like the creek below, changing form, but never truly ending. "Thank you," she said softly, to Thunderbolt, to all the gathered horses, to her father's spirit that somehow felt present in this extraordinary moment. I understand now. When Jessica returned home as dawn was breaking, she found Eleanor awake, sitting on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "They showed you, didn't they?" her mother asked simply. "Robert's place." Jessica nodded, too moved for words. "The horses always go there on important nights," Eleanor explained. "Solstices, equinoxes, anniversaries. Your father understood them, and somehow they understood him. I've seen them gather like that only a few times since he's been gone." "Why tonight?" Jessica finally managed to ask. Eleanor's eyes filled with gentle wisdom. "Perhaps because something important is happening. A healing, a new beginning." As the sun rose higher, painting the valley in morning light, mother and daughter sat together in companionable silence, no longer separated by unspoken grievances or misunderstood intentions. The transformation that had begun with Thunderbolt's watchful presence had deepened into something profound, a reconciliation not just between two women, but between past and present, between grief and hope, between different ways of seeing the world. The Midsummer Festival arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, gentle breezes, and sunshine that warmed without scorching. By mid-morning, the riverside farm was transformed. Colorful tents dotted the meadow. Local artisans arranged their wares in the renovated barn, and the aroma of barbecue and freshly baked pies filled the air. Jessica moved through the crowds with a newfound ease, greeting neighbors she had previously avoided, engaging in conversations that went beyond polite small talk. She noticed Eleanor doing the same, her mother's natural gift for connection on full display as she welcomed people to the farm many hadn't visited in years. "This is exactly how it used to be," Martha commented as she helped arrange a display of her homemade jams. "When Robert was alive, this place was the heart of the community. Then, after he passed," she trailed off, perhaps realizing the sensitivity of the topic. "Then we closed ourselves off," Jessica finished for her. "Mom and I both in different ways. Say it's time to change that." The festival activities unfolded throughout the day: children's games in the meadow, craft demonstrations in the barn, musical performances on a small stage erected near the creek. Jessica found herself fully immersed in the experience, not watching from the periphery as she might have in the past. Late in the afternoon, as the day's heat began to soften toward evening, Michael found her near the refreshment tent. "Your mother's looking for you," he said. "Something about a special event at the bridge." Jessica frowned. "At the bridge? That wasn't in the planning." Michael shrugged, his eyes twinkling with something that suggested he knew more than he was saying. "Apparently it's a tradition that's being revived. Eleanor says it's time." Intrigued, Jessica made her way through the festival grounds toward Hollow Oak Bridge. As she approached, she saw a gathering forming. Not just festival attendees, but what appeared to be most of Serene Valley's residents. At the center of the gathering stood Eleanor, dressed in a flowing blue dress that Jessica recognized from old photographs. Beside her was Thunderbolt, adorned with a garland of summer flowers around his neck. "What's happening?" Jessica asked, approaching her mother. Eleanor took her daughter's hand. "The bridge blessing," she said simply. "We haven't held it since your father passed. It was his ceremony, really, something he created to honor the connection between our community and the land that sustains us." Before Jessica could ask more questions, Eleanor addressed the gathered crowd. Her voice, though aged, carried clearly in the evening air. "Friends and neighbors, many of you remember the bridge blessing that my husband Robert began 30 years ago. It was his belief that this bridge symbolizes what makes our community special, our connections to each other, to the past, and to the future we build together." Murmurs of agreement and nostalgic smiles spread through the crowd. Many of the older residents nodded, while younger ones looked curious about this forgotten tradition. "Today, with the return of the Midsummer Festival to Riverside Farm, my daughter Jessica and I would like to revive this tradition." Eleanor turned to Jessica with questioning eyes, seeking confirmation. For a moment, Jessica felt a flicker of her old resistance, the part of her that would have found such ceremonies embarrassingly sentimental, rooted in superstitions she had worked hard to distance herself from. But that resistance melted quickly, replaced by a genuine appreciation for the meaning behind the ritual, for the way it honored both community and continuity. She stepped forward to stand beside her mother. "We would be honored to continue what my father began," she said, her voice steady and clear. Eleanor beamed, then continued, The blessing is simple. Each household brings a ribbon representing their hopes for the coming year. Together, we weave them into a single braid, symbolizing how our individual lives form the larger fabric of this community. From baskets held by several community elders, colorful ribbons were distributed. Jessica watched as people wrote wishes, names, and intentions on their ribbons with the provided markers, some solemnly, others with laughter and shared jokes. Michael appeared at her side, offering a deep green ribbon. "Thought you might need one," he said quietly. Jessica took it gratefully, considering what to write. So many possibilities filled her mind. Career goals, personal aspirations, hopes for the farm. In the end, she simply wrote, "Connection." When all the ribbons were prepared, Eleanor guided the community in a procession across the bridge. At the center, where the span was highest above the creek, they stopped. Thunderbolt, seeming to understand his role perfectly, stood at attention beside a wooden post that Jessica hadn't noticed before, newly installed or perhaps restored from years past. "Now we begin the weaving," Eleanor announced. "Each ribbon joins the others, none more important than any other, all essential to the whole." One by one, residents approached, attaching their ribbons to the growing braid that would eventually encircle the post. Children were lifted to add their contributions. Elderly neighbors assisted as needed. Jessica watched in wonder as the multicolored creation took shape, physical proof of the bonds that connected everyone present. When her turn came, Jessica added her green ribbon to the weave, feeling a surprising emotion swell in her chest. Not embarrassment as she might have expected, but a profound sense of belonging. This was her community, her heritage. The farm, the bridge, the people gathered here, all were part of who she was, who she had always been beneath the layers of resistance. As the last ribbons were added, Eleanor spoke again. "The braid will remain here until next year's festival, weathering sun and rain, cold and heat, just as our community weathers life's seasons together. May it remind us that while individual threads may fray, together we create something strong and beautiful." The gathering erupted in applause, then began to disperse as twilight deepened, many heading back to the farm, where evening festivities were beginning. Jessica lingered at the bridge, admiring the colorful creation and the meaning it represented. Thunderbolt remained beside her, his presence now a comfort rather than a mystery. On his other side stood Willow, and behind them, to Jessica's amazement, were the horses from that moonlit gathering, a silent assembly of witnesses. "They came for the blessing," said Eleanor, noticing her daughter's surprise. "Did Dad know?" Jessica asked. "About the horses gathering, about Thunderbolt being special?" Eleanor smiled, her eyes reflecting the first emerging stars. "Your father used to say that animals remember what humans have forgotten, that we're all connected, all part of something larger than ourselves." He didn't need to explain Thunderbolt or the others. He simply accepted the mystery and was grateful for it. As darkness fell completely, lanterns were lit along the path back to the farm, creating a magical corridor of light. Music drifted from the meadow where dancing had begun. Laughter mingled with the distant sound of the creek. Walking arm in arm with her mother, Jessica felt the full weight of the transformation she had undergone. From resentment to reconciliation, from resistance to acceptance, from feeling trapped to choosing to remain rooted while still growing toward the sky. And as they rejoined the festival, she realized that the question that had haunted her for years, stay or go, tradition or innovation, roots or wings, had never required an either-or answer. Like the creek that flowed beneath Hollow Oak Bridge, life's path could take unexpected turns while still remaining true to its essential nature. 1 year later, Jessica stood at her office window, watching golden autumn leaves dance across the yard of Riverside Farm. The home office she had created in the old storage room had evolved into a proper workspace with state-of-the-art technology that connected her to colleagues across the country. On the walls hung both professional accolades and family photographs, no longer separate realms, but integrated aspects of a life fully embraced. The past year had brought changes that once would have seemed impossible. Her remote work arrangement had proven so successful that her company had launched a rural outreach initiative with Jessica at the helm. The program, which brought technological resources and job opportunities to communities like Serene Valley, was already showing promising results. Eleanor had transformed as well. Released from the burden of being the sole keeper of family traditions, she had discovered new interests and revived old ones. Her expanded garden now supplied several local restaurants with organic produce, and the quilting circle she had joined met weekly in the riverside barn, their laughter and stories filling the space with new energy. And Michael, Jessica smiled at the thought of him. What had begun as friendship had blossomed into something deeper, something that neither rushed nor hesitated, but flowed at its own natural pace. He divided his time between his work at the regional hospital and research projects that brought better healthcare to rural areas. Passion and purpose aligned in ways Jessica recognized and respected. A familiar neigh drew her attention. Thunderbolt stood in the yard, Willow beside him as usual. The golden horse's role had shifted over the months, from mysterious observer to acknowledged guardian to beloved companion. Jessica no longer questioned his intelligence or awareness, accepting that some gifts came in unexpected forms. "I see them," came Eleanor's voice from the doorway. "They're getting impatient for our ride." The weekly trail ride had become a cherished ritual, mother, daughter, and the horses that had helped bridge the gap between them. Sometimes Michael joined them, sometimes others from the community, but often it was just the four of them finding new paths through familiar landscapes. "Coming," Jessica replied, saving her work and closing her laptop. "Just finishing the proposal for the education initiative." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "The one that would bring technology classes to rural schools. Martha's grandson would love that. The boys are natural with computers, but they can't afford much at home." Jessica smiled at her mother's awareness of community needs, something she had once mistaken for simple gossip, but now recognized as deep connection and care. "That's exactly why we're developing it. Talent exists everywhere, opportunity doesn't." Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of ripening apples and distant wood smoke. Jessica and Eleanor prepared the horses with practiced ease, their movements synchronized after months of shared routine. "Shall we ride to the bridge?" Eleanor suggested. "I want to check on last year's ribbon braid before next week's ceremony." Jessica agreed, mounting Thunderbolt with the fluid motion that now came naturally. As they rode, she admired the landscape of Serene Valley transformed by fall colors, the same view she had known her entire life, yet somehow always new, always revealing different aspects of its beauty. At Hollow Oak Bridge, they dismounted, approaching the center where the weathered ribbon braid still circled the post. After a year of sun, rain, and snow, the colors had faded, but the weave remained intact, a testament to connections that endured through changing seasons. "It held up well," commented Eleanor, touching the braid gently. "Some years it's nearly gone by the time we replace it. Like the one the year before Dad died," Jessica remembered suddenly. "You told me the ribbons had completely unraveled, and he said it was a sign of change coming." Eleanor looked surprised. "You remember that? You were so dismissive of his superstitions back then. I thought you hadn't been listening." "I was always listening," Jessica admitted. "I just wasn't ready to hear." They stood in companionable silence, gazing down at the creek that had flowed beneath this bridge for generations, through droughts and floods, through celebrations and sorrows, through departures and returns. "I never thought we'd be here like this," Eleanor said finally. "After Robert died and you became so distant, I was certain I'd lose you to some faraway city, that you'd visit occasionally with awkward politeness, like a stranger returning to a half-forgotten childhood home." Jessica slipped her arm around her mother's shoulders, feeling the slight frame that had once seemed so imposing. "I almost became that person," she acknowledged, "the one who left and never really came back." "What changed?" Eleanor asked, though her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. Jessica looked toward the horses, who stood watching them with their usual attentive expressions. "Thunderbolt happened," she said simply, "and through him I started to see what had been in front of me all along, that staying didn't have to mean being stuck, that honoring the past didn't require sacrificing the future, that being your daughter and being my own person were never mutually exclusive." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Your father used to say that horses see us more clearly than we see ourselves. That's why he always treated them with such respect, not just as animals, but as witnesses to our true nature." As if understanding that he was being discussed, Thunderbolt approached, pressing his velvet muzzle against Jessica's shoulder. She stroked his neck, feeling the strong muscles beneath the golden coat, the steady heartbeat, the warmth of a living being who had, in his silent way, guided her toward reconciliation with both her mother and herself. "The festival committee wants to add something new to the bridge blessing this year," Jessica mentioned, as they remounted to head home. A storytelling circle afterward, where people can share memories of the valley, of growing up here, of changes they've seen. That sounds wonderful, Eleanor replied, her face lighting up. Will you share a story? Jessica considered the question as Thunderbolt carried her across the familiar landscape. Would she talk about her father's wisdom, her mother's strength, her own journey from resistance to acceptance? Or perhaps about a golden horse who watched and waited until she was ready to see the truth about her place in the world? I think I will, she decided. I have a story worth telling now. As they crested the final hill before Riverside Farm came into view, Jessica felt a momentary sense of seeing her life from above. The paths taken and not taken, the currents that had shaped her journey. The farm, once a symbol of limitation, now represented possibility. The community, once escaped through emotional withdrawal, now offered connection and purpose. And her mother, once positioned as an adversary in Jessica's mind, now stood revealed as the ally she had always been. The sun was setting as they returned to the stables, painting the farmhouse in hues of amber and gold. Inside, a small dinner party awaited. Michael, Martha and her husband, a few other neighbors gathered to plan final details for the upcoming festival. Before joining them, Jessica paused at the stable door, watching as Thunderbolt and Willow settled into their stalls. The golden horse met her gaze one final time that day, his eyes holding the same knowing expression that had once unsettled her, but now brought comfort. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words seemed inadequate for all she wanted to express. In response, Thunderbolt simply nodded as if to say, "You found your own way, as you were always meant to do. I merely walked beside you until you could see the path." As Jessica turned toward the house, toward the lights and laughter waiting inside, she carried with her the certainty that some witnesses to our lives see deeper than others, past our defenses and justifications to the truth waiting beneath. And sometimes those witnesses don't speak a word, but simply watch with patient eyes until we're ready to acknowledge what they've known all along. That the journey home is rarely a straight line, but rather a meandering path like the creek beneath Hollow Oak Bridge, finding its way forward by flowing around obstacles, carving new channels when necessary, but always ultimately remaining true to its essential nature. My friends, we have reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time. The fog danced over